And hi, everybody. Welcome to the Mark and Tim Show. This is the last webinar class of the 2018 Business of Wine programs. And just one word of housekeeping. To get your certificate, you need to turn in the original $25 red blend using the cost of goods calculator. And then you need a second project with the cost of goods calculator. If you're a newbie, it could be a continuation of the $25 red blend, or even more fun, make a really expensive top-end cab, or find a wine you're passionate about and do a case study or whatever. And along with the second wine, the second wine can also be your blending exercise. And then the business plan template. And the business plan template, I'm not looking for a huge amount of data, just that you've gone through and thought about the various areas and decisions and that kind of thing. And you've got up to 4 weeks from tomorrow midnight to submit the program. So Mark and I were just talking about the illusions of time and holidays, and also just all the stuff that comes together in life. So we offer those 4 additional weeks. You can watch the videos. You can have access to the workbooks, the Wine BizSim workbooks. You'll have that actually for a year. You get a year subscription to that. And then if you need anything from the Napa Valley Wine Academy site, go there, save the pages as HTML on your computer or whatever. You usually have access for about a week, but I would say you would want to get, if you do need information from there, you wanted to get it by Friday. Some reason my computer, do I black out when my computer blacks out, or?
Nope.
No?
You're good.
So I've just been having all sorts of computer issues on top of everything else. But, all right, so Marco, anything that you want covered or whatever?
No, let's press on.
Well, there you go. Okay. So what I thought we would do, at least one of your classmates wanted some more information on import and export. And it just so happens that I'm just finishing up a new import-export sort of intensive. So I thought I'd go ahead and use that as our closing program. So let me share my screen. And here we go. By the way, one of the ways to also leverage your, if you will, your newfound knowledge, I just got something in the mail, my email about this, and it's a winery for sale. It can be kind of interesting to go in and see what kind of properties are available. MW students and higher level WSET, these also make really interesting case studies whenever there's any essay questions about valuations and how would you spend money for this and blah, blah, blah. And there's also a way to do the cost of goods calculator, to take an average FOB, an average cost of goods, do it for however many 80,000 cases, and you can actually run an estimation of a winery P&L that's kind of interesting. And for only $80 million or $25 million, sorry, you can buy this beautiful estate in with the ugliest label.
Nice.
Am I being recorded? But anyways, just kind of interesting stuff. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about the business of import and export. Let me close these windows up just for kicks. No, I don't want to save that. Getting ready, I get to go to New Zealand, yay, in January, which is a good time to go to New Zealand if you live in Bend, Oregon. All right, so so exporting, importing, and taking a look at how this whole system works. And this is good to know. One of the things that's very valuable, if even if you're not exporting your wines, it's really good to know how the system works, because as you're looking at long-term and short-term threats to your business, a lot of people think, well, you know, I'm this, you know, GSM blend from this area, or I'm a you know, primarily Cabernet from this region, or whatever. You don't immediately think, okay, well, I really ought to be concerned about what's going on a more global basis, and that that the dynamics of the international market can have a profound effect on what's in the market and at what prices. Okay, so basically, import and export, there's a, if you look at exporting wine to X market, you can reverse engineer that kind of as to understand importing wine. But basically, you've got a producer, you've got a product, and then that producer may have all the wherewithal, all the ability for the permits and preparing documents and doing the logistics in-house, or they may work with somebody in the country of origin to help prepare the shipments and to do the paperwork and to handle that kind of stuff. But the first piece of this, obviously, is that you've got the producer in the country of origin. The second thing then is obviously having an importer in whatever destination country. So if your producer's in France, you need an importer in the US. And again, it may be valuable to have a broker or an independent third party and there are a lot of companies and individuals that offer these services, so that they can handle the paperwork and the requirements and make sure everything's done correctly at the receiving end of it, okay? Then, depending on what your sales and marketing model is for the destination country, you'll need some sort of a distributor who might be the importer, but they also might be a more traditional sort of three-tier kind of situation. And in the US and around the country, many distributors, wholesale distributors, also hold their own import license. So they can actually source wines, bring them in. For the most part, it's really difficult for the large distributors and even the small distributors to build import brands, but sometimes they'll want to clear commodity wines like Bordeaux's or Burgundies or certain Italian estates and so forth. So distributors can hold their own license, bring a product in, and then distribute it in whatever area or region they're licensed or state in the United States. Then, of course, you've got to find your sales channels in the destination country, on premise for retail stores, and then off-premise for restaurants, bars, hotels, and that kind of stuff. You've also got to find out whether there's direct-to-consumer sales within the destination country, and this is where using China as an export example is really good, just because it's such absolute chaos. They don't have an infrastructure like we do in the United States, like there is in the UK, and so forth. So it makes it very challenging because they don't have a national infrastructure for wine imports and sales. And then, of course, anything internet, wine clubs, websites, resellers, and whatever. But the real key is making sure that you've got the documentation prepared that is appropriate for the market. And it's worth noting, this is much less prevalent now, but to do business in China, when I started doing business in China 25 years ago, you really also had to have connections for who was going to bribe the customs people to release your wine, and you had to budget for that. And there were all these horror stories of wine shipments that went over, they made it to the docks, and then they couldn't get released from customs. And the wines are just sitting in containers, baking in the sun, and whatever. The other thing is that if your paperwork's not done correctly, they'll just send the whole schmear back. They'll just put it on a boat, and you'll be charged for that. So this is a schematic of the export supply chain, and at the producer level, you could have an export broker. Then there are also third parties who collect wines to then consolidate and ship that are not producers. And this is actually a business I've done, and I work with other companies that are like this. And what they'll do is they'll negotiate purchases from, let's say, a group of different wineries, and they'll put together a container, and then this person has the contacts and whatever in the destination market. So they actually, this would be a third-party exporter, and it may be somebody who does business in China themselves, or as in my case, I did it on behalf of parties in China. Okay, so that's the different considerations there. Then the next step is making sure you've got your permits and certificates and approvals and analysis. Almost invariably, you need a certificate of origin, which is showing where the wine came from, that it meets all the criteria. You have to have an export permit in many cases. A lot of times you have to provide laboratory analysis of the wines, including very often for things like sorbitol and stuff that's commonly used, but you might not think immediately about. UK a number of years ago was sending back a lot of wines from South America because of certain compounds that were used in the processing and the winemaking, and actually for sweetening the wine. And so you've got to do that. Then you've got to have your freight, logistics, and shipping lined up. And it's really critical that you're working with an experienced a freight forwarder, logistics company, and that that you've got the correct type of container that the product's going to be put in, that if it's going hot or cold, it needs to usually be temperature controlled, and then negotiating the price is a very major part of this. And then finally, you need to understand the taxes, duties, and approvals that are necessary at the receiving end of things, and any documentation you need to provide for that. All right. Then once the shipment lands, once the goods arrive in the destination country, then you have to have also all the paperwork, taxes paid, etc. And the importer that's actually receiving the goods could be a producer entity. So if it's a larger company, you'll have your own company in the destination country, and you're licensed to do business there. And you can even potentially centrally warehouse your goods or whatever. So one of the receiving party options is to be a producer that has people there, storage facilities, whatever. The importer receiving it could be an import broker, so somebody who specializes in receiving the goods and storing them and so forth. And it might be the government. So in a lot of countries, there are what they call monopolies. And we have those in the United States, in Pennsylvania, and in Utah. And in Canada, there's sort of betwixt and between in their provinces. It used to be you could only sell to the liquor control boards, but now they've privatized a lot of that. But you need to know how all that works in the country. In Scandinavia, particularly, Norway, Finland, Sweden, you have monopoly entities, and you're literally selling it to the government, and they control everything, and that's ironclad. So then you get the product to a licensed storage and distribution point, which may have been, somewhere along here, but also you could have an import broker and then have an arrangement with a national distributor or regional distributor, and then of course then they get the wine to the point of sale. Okay. And what people are looking at really carefully in this area of business is supply and demand. What's moving around the world. Duties and taxes can make a huge difference in how your wine is positioned and placed. Exchange rates, and then trade relations. Anything with alcohol tends to be a favorite for punitive taxation. Australia just went through a situation where they have a favorable trade advantage, that they were being fast-tracked to a zero tax, which it was huge advantage, and so over a period of time, they had to pay taxes, but the duties were being lowered down to zero. There was something that happened in a technology dispute with China, and the first thing that China did was hit wine. Wine was one of the first of many things that they hit with punitive taxes back up. Oh, okay, we'll get that cleared up back down again, right? So it can be a real roller coaster as far as that goes. So the typical steps: you have to have your product specifications, lab analysis, and each country has forms and they stipulate exactly what's needed. Origin requirements to guarantee authenticity of the products. The destination requirements also, you have to have label approvals, and in many cases you have to have specific verbiage and maybe even dual languages that aren't required in your domestic market, that are required for doing business in an export market. And sometimes these can be handled with what they call strip labels. So you've got your standard label, then you add a second label just to the wine for the export. Then you get everything prepared and ready to go. Off it goes into the shipping. goes to the destination and gets distributed. So those are the steps. So the global market drivers of supply and demand for both grapes and for wine is just a wild ride, and there's a lot of data available in the U.S. from the TTB site, the government alcohol beverage trade board. You've got a lot of independent things. So finding kind of what's going on in the world is pretty easy to find. Duties and taxes. So U.S. Just in the past year went from 48.2% combined duties and taxes to 66%. So this is a really significant increase. So a $10 bottle of wine, when it lands in China, is tax and duty becomes almost $15, and now it's over $16.50 just based on duties and taxes. And then New Zealand, Chile, Australia only pay 27%. So think of the equivalency of a $10 bottle of wine as a general retail value. That $10 bottle of U.S. wine is roughly $15 as soon as it lands. The equivalent wine from Chile or from New Zealand or Australia is only $12.70. So it's a big difference. And these are value taxes. So if it's a $100 bottle of wine, kapow, it really jumps quickly. There were all sorts of antics, and there's pictures online of shipments of wine being destroyed because people would take a pallet, stack up a lot of expensive wine on the inside, and then surround it with cases of cheap wine to see if they could disguise it. And the Chinese have become very thorough in how they look at every pallet and all this kind of stuff, because this is a big deal. Consumption trends. Consumption trends are really hard to gauge in a proactive way, considering the lead time needed to procure an order, to process everything, to get all the paperwork, to get the product lined up. If you're shipping by truck, and if it's, let's say, U.S. to Canada, then the travel time's not all that great. If it's U.S. to U.K. or U.S. to China or Japan or something, it can be much longer. So you've also got to really look at forecasting, and forecasting consumption trends can be pretty tough. And then competitive threats, what's going on in the market with beer and cider, mead, spirits, pot, stuff like that. And what are the fashion trends? French wines in China were the big thing because French fashion was the big thing. And the French really grabbed and branded France as the go-to and the benchmark for what good wine is. And everybody else has been fighting like crazy to buck that fashion trend. Then when you throw the duties and taxes on top of things, it makes it that much harder. And then there's always the social and legal issues and considerations. And again, using China as an example, I think 5 years ago, some changes took place in the government to curb bribes of officials. And in doing so, they made it illegal to have certain things like clubs. Private clubs was a big thing in China. And it was in private clubs where the fine wines were being primarily sold. And the lid was put that, and my wife and I were on our way over for an extended trip to some pretty remote parts of China, but the end of the trip was in Beijing, and we were I was presenting several dinners at a very high-end private club, and when we got there, everything referring to it as a club was gone. They actually had to change the name. It was no longer a private club. Almost always the important visitors, everybody wants their name badge. The important officials and whatever, no name badges, no pictures, because they didn't want to be seen at a high-end wine event. So these things are very real. And these social and legal considerations are very important to understand. Mark, if you have any questions or whatever, you can just chime in as needed.
No, I was just going to make a comment about Francis Ford Coppola's, I think it's Coppola, and his new venture into infusion of marijuana into wine. Wasn't that Coppola's who's trying that?
Well, there's a number of things going on, and there's also a lot of gray areas in terms of what you can call things. So I'm not sure about Coppola's. How is he doing on that? Or did they get that approved?
There was an article written in one of the like wine.com or something, and he was saying that's the next big push. You know, he's done everything. He's been an artist, filmmaker, and winemaker, and now he's really trying to push this marijuana infused wine. And I can't see it actually. I mean, I can't see the taste being anything but terrible.
Well, so the interesting thing is, the first thing that I do know a bit, Melissa Etheridge actually, I think, had the first product on the market.
Okay.
And by law, it's actually considered a tincture. So at present, you cannot mix one controlled substance with another controlled substance unless it's a tincture then has a medicinal quality, and it can include alcohol.
Okay.
So as far as I know, it's a THC extract that you have to do with heat and whatever to get the THC, and then they infuse it in wine. And I believe it's still available if you look up Melissa Etheridge and wine and pot, you'll find it. So I don't think they've expanded or to my knowledge yet allowed that to happen in kind of a wine blend. The putting a business hat on, you might not be able to imagine how that could be good, but it's probably not for you anyways. And as a business opportunity, it could be huge.
Understand that. The palate just doesn't seem to work, is all.
Inside of our preconceptions, but to a 20-year-old, would it? Or a 21-year-old, I guess.
I guess it would.
See, and this is the hard part. And here's the other crazy thing. That kind of infusing is how most wine actually was produced in France and Italy 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it was called vermouth. Yep. It was called May wine. they were extremely popular. And so there are ways that somebody who's a, uh, a talented flavor person could actually create it in a way that would appeal to the people who, pot edibles are a big thing here in Oregon. And
Colorado also.
What's that?
I said here in Colorado also.
Yeah. Oh, well, exactly. A good friend of mine that actually is hired me is onto the faculty at Washington State University. Byron Marlowe actually studies pot tourism, and he did a really great presentation on the tourism value that pot brought to Colorado, and then did a complete breakdown of different market segments and the kind of people and how long they stay and what they do just on a tourism basis.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, so there's really fascinating stuff, and there's a lot of business opportunities out there for the people who get it right. So who knows? And what better aperitif is how port and vermouths and all these tinctures and whatever used to be served to stimulate appetite. So imagine you're serving a little pot aperitif, at your restaurant, and now look at the table. Look at how many all these people out there with the munchies. Yay. All right, so then the next thing is how importing works in the U.S. And so you need to register and have a staffed import company in the U.S. if you're importing wine. So you have to have a presence here. So this would be for French wines or South American coming into the U.S. And then you can also apply for a wholesaler's basic permit if you, so as we said, you could be an importer and a distributor at the same time. And the TTB then regulates what you can and can't do and how that all works. And the same, and basically every country then has their version of how they allow importers to work, what kind of permitting, what kind of licenses, and what they're allowed to do and not to do. Okay. Agreements and responsibilities is so huge, and the due diligence required to make sure that all the paperwork's handled, all the label certificates, all these things, and not only that, but shipping requirements and specifications and safeguards and so forth. So, and the final piece of it, does the importer really have a vested interest in the success of the brand? And you'd be amazed at how many times people sign agreements and go through all this rigmarole only to find that they've shipped to a company who's really not going to help build the brand. And nowhere is this more apparent than in China. Still today, 5 years ago, it could be easily argued 90% of the wine that goes into China just disappears somewhere into the market, goes into gifting and corporate things and whatever. And there's no brand building, there's no distribution and whatever. And it's really, really frustrating for companies that are trying to actually establish an ongoing business over there. So both the importer and the brand owner, you've got to determine payment terms, insurance, shipping specifications and safeguards, and it's got to be in a form that can be enforced. It all may look good on paper here in the U.S., but can you enforce it in in the destination country. So I'll be sending a copy of this out to everybody, and this is basically from the TTB site. You can access this on the web. So importing bottled beverages into the U.S. and it gives you basically everything you need. You can look at the permits and all that kind of stuff. Taxes, duties, and registrations, distilled spirits, wine, and beers, tax fees and rates, all that. Oh, and one word down here. If you ever see the word cola in wine business, that's certificate of label approval, not a fizzy drink. Different certifications. People get in trouble because they may have something that qualifies as a natural wine or an organic wine or something like that, and then it doesn't meet the requirements of the EU or of the destination country. So it's also really, really important if you've got any special designations and whatever to make sure that that's legitimate and will be accepted in your market. And that usually comes out during your certificate of label approval process, but it's something that really makes requires a lot of diligence. All right, and then other considerations and so forth. All right, and then looking at state alcohol control boards and stuff like that. Now, the reason I actually have this is on the TTB site for export. They actually give a list and links to Canada, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico. All right. One of my experience when I was with Beringer, I was director of international business development, and I was asked to go to Mexico. Let's go do business in Mexico. And we had all sorts of great connections down there because Beringer was owned by Nestle during this period. I was there from 88 through 99. And so I went down and met with a number of importers and different companies. They had no idea what the Napa Valley was. They were oblivious to the quality of California wine potential. One of the main buyers that I was meeting with said, "Well, we kind of think that your private reserve Cabernet is about as good as an Uruguayan Cabernet Sauvignon that basically they could buy for $36 a case, and that's what they wanted Beringer Private Reserve for." And it's like, what the hell are you guys smoking? So again, you've really got to understand. A lot of people think, oh, you know, this area or this state or whatever is well known and has a national presence. Maybe not so much. So so there you go. And then going back to the China example, this is labeling requirements, name and brand, ingredients list, net volume, and so forth. So so in some cases, you've got to also get somebody with some expertise in this kind of thing if you've never done it before, because, for example, the ingredients list, a normal label will suffice. They don't require, like the FDA and in the fight that's going on to require actual ingredients label on wine. But these are the kind of things that need to be noted, okay? And that excessive drinking is harmful to health, and it's got to be in Chinese. So they're actually telling you here, all right, that there are specific things that have to be in Chinese, and this is where you've got to determine, can you add an additional small label with this ingredient. When you go in and look at French wines and French Bordeaux, you'll often find the strip label that notes who the importer was, has any required US information that wasn't required in France, and that kind of stuff. Okay. And again, you know, it's got to have your certificate, country of origin, and the origin statement, and the certificate of origin, that kind of stuff. All right. Then you need a commercial invoice, the value declaration, and better be careful, freight insurance documents, packing lists, insurance, and those kind of things. And then licensing and registration and whatever. So for anybody who really needs to learn about this in depth, you can just go through the handout when I send it, but you can also go to the TTD site, and there's a lot to be learned about this. And they'll also give you the current taxes, tariffs, duties, and those kind of things. And so, and they give that for 50 countries. So here, let's take this from a strategic standpoint. I want to get my wine out into the international market. Where do I go? Well, trying to sell your wine in France, trying to sell your wine in most of South America, trying to sell your wine in Australia, trying to sell your wine in Italy. You can pretty much count those countries out because they're facing their own demons and challenges, and it's the proverbial taking coals to Newcastle phenomenon. So one of the neatest strategies I've ever found, Mark, do you know Rodney Strong wines?
Yes.
So Rodney Strong, a lot of people don't know, was a choreographer on Broadway, and he moved out and did the wine thing very early. And he and I became friends in Vancouver, actually, when we were on a radio show together. And he and I were hanging out, and it's like everybody in Vancouver knows Rodney. And when I go to Toronto, the same thing was true with Dick Arrowwood, with Arrowwood Wines. And I'm like, what is this? And basically what they did, and this is very common, take a market where there's some viability of the product and make it a market you want to go to. And it turned out that Rodney loved Vancouver, and so that was his export market. And he worked with the Liquor Control Board. He worked with all the restaurants there, and when he wanted to go spend some time, that's where he went. I think Dick Arrowwood's wife was from Toronto, so he had family there, and that's where he wanted to go. And then this is also an incredible strategy, not only for export, but in the US as well. Do you want to go fight tooth and nail in New York, or do you want to take a city like Indianapolis and work with a smaller market